right, everybody, welcome back to the Friday Night Prepper Pre-Party Show, and I am so excited to have returning guest, one of my favorite teachers, somebody that I look up to quite a bit. You know her from seasons 3 and 5 of Alone. My guest tonight has survived 86 days alone in Patagonia. That is something that very few people in the world will ever be able to say. Welcome back, Carleigh Fairchild. How are you?
Thanks, Tom. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. And hello, everybody out there.
I am so pleased to have you back. Thank you so much. You've been a really good friend to my channel, and I appreciate that. And you've had a lot going on, right? Like we're gonna talk about Hurricane Helene tonight, and you were right smack dab in the center of that thing, right?
I was, yeah.
Yeah.
Asheville, North Carolina area.
Yeah, and as you know, I've got a couple friends up there. They're actually coming to visit us this weekend, so we're looking forward to catching up with them. And we lost track of them for a little while, so I'll talk about that and how scary that all was, and maybe some lessons we can all take away from this. But before we do that, let's pump a few things that you got going on. As usual, you have a couple websites. We're going to scroll down the bottom, and those are going to be in description as well. If you all need to just like click on something, go into the description, click on those two websites. And she's on Instagram. And are you still active on Facebook as well?
I am lightly active on Facebook. I do a lot of Instagram cross posting, but I do check on there and follow up on messages to the best that I can.
Thank you so much, NYC Prepper. Appreciate that. You all don't need to do that, but thank you. Appreciate it. So you do all kinds of stuff, right? Like you've got seminars, you've got retreats, you've got your healing practice. Let's take a couple minutes and just kind of talk about what Carleigh's been up to.
Yeah, so I have here in Asheville, North Carolina, I've got a bodywork healing practice where I see people and use the physical as a doorway to the interconnectedness of our emotions and psychology as well. I really love doing this work. Find that can really make a lot of difference in people's lives by doing bodywork healing with them. So combining some physical stretching. I don't like to use the word manipulations, but I know we use that in bodywork terms. Really helping get the joints back together. So much of us have either like hyperextended joints, like our shoulders might be like slightly out, or even our hips, our femur bones might be slightly out of our sockets. So really working to help them go back in to where they belong, but also in a way that creates more space.
Awesome.
So bringing more space, contact, and flow to people's bodies. Well, I do that a lot in person. I also do some online with folks around the world, which is amazing. Cool. I had a couple in Germany that I worked with for the last couple of years off and on. So awesome to do it in person, but also it works over the internet. Who knew?
I love that. So if people are they can do it. They can book this through Human Nature Connection. Is that right?
Yep. Human Nature Connection. There's a healing page on that website. And you can also book through there. Or if you had questions, you can reach out to me and engage in some conversation if you want to before you book a session.
Sounds good.
So Nyazi bodywork healing. And then I also am offering basketry classes, both in person and online. Last month, I did my first big group basketry online class, and it went fantastic.
I saw the pictures. Yeah.
Yeah. So I got another one coming up in March, another style, a ribbed basket style.
Awesome. Now, since you brought that up, have you know that's a big thing here in the Gullah Geechee community where I live here in coastal South Carolina, with the sweetgrass baskets, right? Yeah. Are you familiar with those?
Sweetgrass and like palm baskets.
Yeah, they're a big thing, and I bought a few of those for my wife. They're expensive, but they're like art. It's functional art, you know. Yeah. And I was trying to explain this to somebody on my knife video that I was doing about like why some knives are more expensive, right? And you can go to a Dollar General and buy a basket, right? But it's not the same thing. right? It doesn't have the handcraft to it, and with the Gullah Geechee community, like there's even like knots that are like family secrets and stuff like that that's passed down. There's a lot of history to it.
Yeah. Yeah, basketry can often be underappreciated both as a skill and as an item to buy. A lot of people think basketry like, oh, that's fine. I don't need that for survival. Like, I'm going to learn how to make a fire and make a bow so I can go hunting.
Sure.
But it all comes back to what containers do you have to put your food in?
Right.
Like looking around our houses, how many bags and backpacks and buckets and totes do we have full of stuff?
Right.
We couldn't go to the store and buy a backpack or a tote. You have to make a basket.
You'd have to make it. Yep.
So it's awesome. And then, like you said, there's so much time put into making baskets, the harvesting of the materials, the preparing of the materials, and then the weaving. And sometimes once I have my materials prepped, I've already put like half the amount of time into that basket as total time. So.
And are you doing, so you guys can check that out as well and see when Carleigh's doing her next class. And then I assume you might be doing that again at Georgia Bushcraft in the fall or the spring?
In the fall gathering, for sure, I'll be there doing basketry. And then I'm going to be doing a couple more basket classes throughout the year also. So right now I've got one scheduled in February and one in March, and then working on the rest of my year.
Okay. And any mindfulness retreats coming up?
Tentatively in the fall. I don't have it scheduled yet, though.
Okay. All right. So you got a lot of cool, you're like me. I have like a million different projects going at the same time.
So the other project I have going is I do one-on-one survival mindfulness coaching. Awesome. So if somebody wants to work with me for like 3 to 6 months and get some really personal, in-depth training, I create a custom curriculum for them to go into the areas in their life they want to focus on. So that's something I really love doing. I love the customization of it because we're all unique. Like there's always things that we want that maybe we're not going to get in a group program.
Absolutely. Well, you all make sure you're checking that out. She is a great teacher. I've taken a few classes with her when we've been at Georgia Bushcraft together and have learned how to do cordage, and which I didn't have. The method I was using was not as good and strong as what she taught me. And we have a lot in common in terms of like mindfulness and that kind of stuff in our approach to just dealing with emergencies and survival and that kind of stuff. So make sure you check out her content, y'all. And if you have questions tonight, please throw them in caps so that I can try to catch them. Mods will try to help me with this as well, please. And you guys know we don't really have a whole lot of rules here. Just be kind to each other. No racism, no sexism, anything like that. Mods have full permission to kick anybody out if they're misbehaving. So we don't usually have a problem here, but I always say the rules anyways. All right.
Good to know the rules.
Good to know the rules. All right. So let's, if you can, let's start with talking about Hurricane Helene. Now, for those who don't know the geography of that area, right? So we're talking about Asheville area of North Carolina. Let's kind of bring them up to speed of what that looks like, because I think that's a big factor in why this was so catastrophic.
Yeah, for sure. So the Asheville area itself is a little bit of a bowl amongst the mountains, but then everywhere outside of Asheville is mountainous with a lot of, like, the roads are almost always along a creek. Houses are right along creeks. Like, it's tight, narrow, winding mountain roads. We've got a couple of confluences of rivers here, which also played into the flooding damage. Where I live is not near a creek, although I had a rushing creek between myself and the neighbor's house that doesn't exist except for when it rains. There'll be some water, but this was enough that it was like white capping, kind of like as it went down the yard. And I actually, a fun piece of Hurricane Helene was I got out my boogie board and I boogie boarded that little creek of water going through my yard, because sometimes you just got to have fun, even amongst craziness. So
Yeah.
In my neighborhood here, we had really high winds. The morning of, I don't know, whatever morning that was. The 28th, was it? I can't recall exactly.
Yeah.
Friday morning.
Late September. Yeah.
Yeah, late September. Leaves are all still on the trees at that point, and woke up in the dark wee hours of the morning hearing the wind and starting to hear trees falling. And being able to tell that they weren't always landing on the ground. There wasn't like a loud crash into the ground kind of thing. And then as daylight creeped on and we could start seeing the trees falling and seeing just how much they were blowing in the wind. Like I was like, wow, I'm watching the news channel of a Florida hurricane right now, with palm trees going, but it's pine trees just.
Yeah. So for my audience, I'm more on coastal South Carolina. We're not terribly far from each other, about 5 or 6 hours. But her area, if they get hurricane, typically it's like really dissipated by the time it gets to y'all, right? Yeah. So it hits our area typically hard, but it's everything is different, right? So we have flooding is always an issue in my city, but the trees are even different, right? And in Florida, the trees are different. We have a lot more palms and oaks, and they're very resilient to hurricane force winds, right? So they're not easy to knock over. Pines, on the other hand, pines snap very easily with high winds, and that's what you all have a lot of, right?
We have a lot of pine, a lot of oak, a lot of maple and tulip trees, hickories. And what was really interesting is that there had been a lot of rain in September already. So rivers were already like at or approaching flood stage before the hurricane rain came into the area. So the hurricane rain came in Wednesday, and it like poured all day Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then still rained all day Thursday as well, and Friday, Thursday night. So a lot of the trees in this area actually just blew over.
Because the ground was so saturated.
The ground was so saturated and the winds were so strong that they just blew over. Like there's some snap trees, but not many.
Okay.
Most are full, just blown over.
Okay.
Which is crazy.
So correct me if I'm wrong. I read something, and I'm not an expert of the mountain weather because I've never lived near mountains. What I read made me believe that part of what happened with this system is that so a lot of weather is generated in the mountains, right? Like the clouds actually form sometimes off of the mountains, right? As the moisture evaporates, it forms clouds. So what I read was that part of what hit that area so hard was that as the rain's coming down and it's hitting the mountains, some of it of course is running down really, really fast off those mountains, and then some of it's going back up into the sky, and it became like this feedback loop.
Yeah, I am not a meteor. I can't say whether that's true or not true.
Yeah.
I can say that there's a really big difference of what happened.
Did I lose you?
Nope, I'm still here, but you're frozen. Hello? Hello?
Yep, I got you back.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
So what happens in the mountains is they can be really different effects depending on where you are. So for instance, I live on a street that runs pretty east-west, and along that street, tons of trees were down. But then the streets that run northwest or north-south didn't have very many trees down.
Okay.
And so it's
because of the wind?
Because of the wind. So like the wind, like most things in life, goes where it's least resisted, maybe. Least resistance. So it was going down the tunnel of the road east-west, but where there was a little bit of a hill and then a north-south road, it didn't hit that road in the same way.
Okay.
So there's pockets all over of like wind damage, and then areas where there's like no wind damage, because of how the mountains interacted with the hurricane system.
Yeah.
And yeah, mass flooding everywhere. I think probably most people have seen some of that online.
Yeah.
Especially where there was a confluence of the Swannanoa River going into the French Broad River. It just completely flooded the Biltmore Village area.
Yeah.
And there's still tons of damage everywhere.
I
Like,
just saw some recent video, and it looks like an apocalyptic scene. It's bad. Yeah.
it's, there's things are slowly creeping on. I remember being like, oh, wow, this traffic light is turned on now. Because it had been off for 2 months.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't turn, so it didn't need to be on. But how there's still just total destruction around, still tons of trees down. Yeah, it's crazy.
So was there,
but taking time.
yeah. Was there a point, after the rain stopped and the wind was dying down, where your survival skills, started like, okay, wow, we're really getting put to the test again, and what are we gonna do? How were you able to help your own family and maybe even neighbors and things like that?
Yeah, so the huge worry was like, what if a tree falls on our house? Which thankfully it didn't. And I also, for anybody who likes to hear these stories, maybe some people don't believe in it, but I like energetically put a bubble around our house and yard to be like, we're gonna stay safe. Um, so bearing tree falling on our house, we have enough stores to be okay. It was like, okay, there's trees down and power lines down. Like, we're not getting out of the neighborhood anytime soon. But that's all right. I've got a 20-pound propane tank and camp stove and lots of food. And our garden, I mean, having a garden to be able to eat out of is also preparedness.
Yes, absolutely.
Still have fresh food.
How far are you from your nearest neighbor?
Not very far at all. 200 feet.
Okay, so were you able to help them at all, or were they? I mean, from what I know, people in that area are kind of self-sufficient minded anyways, right?
Yeah. People were very self-sufficient. Neighbors were like, oh, we're fine. Okay. And then hear afterwards that like they're eating cereal and skipping some meals. It's like, if you would have told, like, we could have had you over. Like, why? So that mentality of like, oh, I'm fine, can sometimes not be helpful.
People are humble, right? They don't want to ask for help.
Yeah. And, the, I don't know, natural disaster, like mentality of it could have been worse. Yeah. Like so many people are like, I'm fine. It could have been worse. No matter what level of destruction they had, even if their complete house was washed away, they're like, it could have been worse. Like my family's okay.
Yeah. So our friends who are probably about 30 minutes or so north of where you are, they're closer to Mount Mitchell. Okay. We of course nobody was expecting your area to get hit like it did. I don't think that was, we knew like, okay, you guys are getting a storm, but whoa, not like that. And so the next day when we started seeing the news reports about like how bad that area got hit, we were like, uh-oh. So we were trying to reach our friends and we couldn't get them, trying every which way that we knew to communicate with them. And my wife and I are the godparents for one of their kids, right? And so they got two little kids at home, and they're also very self-sufficient, independent people. So like we had to keep reminding ourselves of that, like, okay, there's nothing we can do. We can't get to them right now. We have to trust that hopefully they're okay, and if their house is intact and nobody's injured, that they know what to do, you know. But we contacted his parents, and they same thing. They said we can't reach them, and they kept trying to get in. Nobody could get in. You know, the roads were all damaged and blown out. And after I think 4 or 5 days, they finally decided, okay, we have to hoof it out of here. And so they hiked out to the center of their town, where they were able to finally make contact and let everybody know that they're okay. But it was terrifying to know that, like, you know, those are some of our best friends, and that's my little godson, you know. I mean, it was hard being on the sideline and not being able to do anything about it.
Yeah, it was crazy how much, you know, because of the winds, because of the rains and mudslides, as well as power outages, that communications were just down.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was able to I had to walk like to another part of my neighborhood in order to get communications.
Mm-hmm. So was your family trying to reach you and that kind of thing, like I was just describing?
Luckily, I live with my mom.
Okay.
So if that wasn't, I'm like, if we weren't living together, like it would have been a huge concern.
Yeah.
Friday morning, we were able to have some communications to answer Cold War Preppers' question. Mm-hmm. To a couple of key people that we know, to be like, okay, they're okay. But then it got worse. Like communications got worse, perhaps as more people were trying to use the limited communications. I don't know why.
Mm-hmm. They put up temporary towers, right? That
they eventually did, okay. Yes. But there for many days, we didn't have cell service. And at my house, I generally, for some reason, it's like this little pocket that is hard to have cell service. Mm-hmm. So we rely on the internet here. Mm-hmm. And that had gone out because there'd been so much rain that it had taken out our internet. Mm-hmm. Before trees fell and took our lines down.
That was one of the first things that went.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Just because of the rain, and we have a fireplace that's not usable, very sadly. And we have our like router in the chimney. Mm-hmm. There was so much rain. The rain actually came in, like dripped through the chimney.
Oh, wow.
Normally that doesn't happen. Like it's never dripped before, but it dripped and took out the router. Oh. So we were without internet for one day before everybody else was also out of internet.
Yeah. And this was Freedom by Me's comment here. This was something I think a lot of people started thinking about afterwards is, okay, so what if cell phone towers go down? What are our other options?
Yeah. And ham radio, I mean, that would have been awesome to know, to have the skills and have one, because then you really can communicate.
Yeah. I did read that Starlink is working on some kind of contract with Apple so that those with iPhones, I don't know, I assume that eventually it'll go to what's the other phones when people don't have iPhones? Yeah. I assume that it'll go to both eventually, but right now they're working on a contract with iPhones so that all iPhones from, you know, a certain, like I have the 14, mine won't have it, but maybe like the 17 on or something, will be able to do also satellite calls. Now there is a way, I think from the 14 on, there is a way to do it. I wrote all that stuff down, but nobody would have known that beforehand, right? Like, because nobody uses satellite phone until you have to use satellite phone.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, to wrap back to your question of like, how was the survival aspect of it? Mm-hmm. We had some stroke of luck that my house continued to have water. A lot of the whole city of Asheville water was turned off because major water pipes had gotten compromised from the reservoirs. So we had a trickle of water, but we had also filled, that morning was when we finally thought to do it, but we filled the bathtub Friday morning and other things that we had to complement what we already had in storage. And then with the roads being where they were and the little bits of information that came into us, we're like, we're not going to drive anywhere. Like, there's no gas. There's chaos potentially happening places.
Yeah.
The best thing we can do is just to stay put and, take care of, talk with our neighbors, see how people are doing close to us. Like, we just go walking around and just talk to people.
Yeah.
And connect with them, which was something I really appreciated. How much people just stopped to say, hi, how are you? That isn't part of our everyday life, at least not where I live.
Yeah.
And now that things are, quote, back to normal, it's like people aren't walking around hardly as much anymore. And they're not stopping to say hi.
Yeah.
Although the other, 2 weeks ago, somebody did stop, and it was so surprising and also so refreshing. Like, oh, cool, this person just stopped to say hi. So
the one of the other prepper channels, I don't remember which one it was, maybe somebody in chat will remember, was talking, they were running their generator, and this was maybe like day 2 or 3 of after the storm, and people started coming out of the woods and coming up to her property and offering her 3 times the amount of money in cash to buy her generator. Now that may sound like, oh, hey, that's a great opportunity, right? But that also speaks to desperation, right? And desperation, people can do things that they wouldn't normally do, right? Did you see any kind of stuff like that?
Definitely was aware of it. There's a little corner gas station, convenience store that people were walking to get some groceries. And we had a tree fall across our driveway, and we actually decided to leave it in place just in case things got sketchy.
Little barrier.
Maybe somebody won't choose to walk up this driveway because of this tree. They'll go to another driveway instead.
Right.
Was something. There's a pawn gun store a couple of miles away that it got broken into, and evidently there was a huge police standoff and 300 people watching.
Wow.
It's oh my gosh, crazy.
Yeah. What was that? How many days in was that? I mean, that's the question that preppers always are talking about. How long would it take?
I think it was just a couple of days.
Yeah.
We have a neighbor who their work required them to keep moving. So they were bringing us intel back. A motorcycle muffler on a generator keeps it hushed. That's a good tidbit.
Yeah. And the little, they're not really generators. They call them solar generators, but the solar power stations, they're basically silent, right? So we've got that, and that's what we use for when there's power outages here. We've talked about getting a gasoline powered one too, and probably will at some point. But my thought on this for people who are wondering about your operational security would be, think about which ones are the silent ones and use those as much as you can. And when you have to use your loud ones, do that and charge up your solar powered ones quick and then shut it off. The least amount of time that you can generate that noise, the least amount of attention you're bringing to it.
Yeah, totally. And I don't have a generator, but I have an inverter. And so a 1100 watt inverter. And so hook that up to my car battery and then ran it twice a day for about 2 hours to keep our freezer and refrigerator good.
Yeah. And those are fairly inexpensive, right?
Yeah.
They're not terribly expensive.
And they're small.
They're small. Yeah.
It also then when the car was running, because something I realized I didn't have was a weather radio. Like it hadn't crossed my mind because we have so much other technology around us all the time. And then without that being workable, I was like, oh yeah, we used to have a weather radio as a kid when we went to the basement for tornadoes, like, and we'd listen to that. So I was listening to my car radio when I was charging, running it for the freezer and refrigerator. But that's an item I purchased after was now have a weather radio to get it. Yeah.
We have one. Most of the time I turn it off because that loud beeping that it does, it's like your amygdala gets activated, like, and that comes from, we used to live in a tornado prone area. And so that tone now for me, when I hear that tone, it means instantly like my amygdala gets activated and it's fight, flight, freeze time,
Yep. Yeah. Yep. I got one of the cheap, small emergency radios. It has a light on it. You can crank it to charge. You can also use it to charge a phone.
So Lee, I saw your comment there. Can everybody else in chat, are you still able to see video? It sounds like Lee lost video, so I don't know if it's just one person. All right, so we've got about 15 minutes. If you have questions, throw them up. I'll keep going here with my questions. The community you've already kind of answered, right? It sounds like your little neighborhood kind of watched out for each other and everybody was trying to take care of each other.
Yeah, a fun thing was that people started writing notes and putting them at crossroads. So the places that, like what grocery store was opening up, where there was gas, posting the radio station that was instrumental in connecting a lot of different people and organizations. So that was a fun resource. And then people were also putting food and water there for.
Oh, see, I love that. Yeah. That was actually going to be my next question. We talked about like that, desperate people can sometimes do bad things, but I'm always telling my channel that there will also be in emergencies, there's also going to be people who are good and heroic and people who are trying to help other people and people who are trying to protect other people. So it sounds like you had some of that too.
Yeah. And there was a couple of people who had generators in the neighborhood early on, and they put up a sign like at the end of their driveway saying, if the generator's on, come on up. You can plug in to it to charge things.
Nice.
So there was a lot of sharing. I mean, it was through the neighborhood that our roads got cleared initially. It's just anybody who had a chainsaw came out and started cutting trees, clearing the road enough so people could get out. So
what about any issues in your neighborhood with like first aid or medical issues, and how did you all handle that?
I didn't come across any first aid medical issues. So, yeah.
Is there anybody on your street who's like a medic or a nurse or anything like that?
I would say probably, but I don't specifically know.
Yeah. Good to have in your community if you've got, and a doctor would be really good to have, like you and I, we know I know first aid, mental health first aid, and I know basic first aid, and I can do some stuff with that, and I can do some little bit of things with plant medicine and things like that, but not a doctor. I wouldn't even say I have the same levels as like an EMS, that they can do things that I've never done. How about, what would you do in preparation different? Is there, other than the things we already talked about, like a couple little pieces of gear that you ended up picking up, is there anything that you would do different if you heard like, now this is, granted, I think you're not going to see this again in your area in your lifetime. I really don't think that's going to happen. I think for you all, it was a once in a lifetime thing, but what would you do different if you knew Asheville area was potentially going to be in the direct path of the eye?
Like another hurricane.
Yeah.
Well, I answer it in two ways. One is another modification I've had to my preparedness is to have more water stored. and then to also have some gas stored, because if our house got completely demolished, and we needed to drive out, like realizing that it could take multiple times as long as normally to get out of an area because of the flooding and damage, and then needing to like maybe cut trees along the way. So having gas stored to be able to get out, and then trying to be better about never having my gas tank less than half. It still happens sometimes, but less than it used to. Freedom by Me rain barrels. I don't have one yet, but I would love to get one.
This here too, if for those who are living, not necessarily even just for those in rural areas, but like having another mode of transportation. Like I've got an e-bike that's like our backup to our if nothing else, I can pedal until that thing is out of battery, and then I can pedal until I'm out of battery, and that'll get me pretty far.
Yeah, having a bicycle was something I wish I had in those early days, because I could have covered more ground than walking, for sure. Normally, and where I live, a bicycle is not great. There's just the roads are really narrow, so it's not a very safe thing normally. But when the roads are basically shut down, a bicycle would have been great to get around.
Yeah, and on another channel, we were talking about horses, right? Like a lot of people forget that like that was the mode of transportation for hundreds of years. It was horses, right? So
totally.
do you ride at all, or have you?
I have ridden. Yeah.
Okay. How many people do you think in the prepping and survival community have considered that as like a survival skill?
I would guess not many.
Yeah.
I think because of the cost and upkeep of having horses.
Yeah.
The space required to do that.
Yeah. We used to have horses when I was living in Kentucky, and very expensive to keep and maintain, very time consuming, but I mean they're fun, and I got fairly okay at it. I can walk, trot, and canter. I can't gallop. Gallop. Can you?
I have, but my horse experience is a little unorthodox, maybe. More of what I've done was in Mongolia when I was there working as a tourist intern for a summer. And so riding with horses that are used to being race horses.
Wow.
And yeah, I don't have any formal training, I would say, or really much formal experience with horses, but a lot of just like random experiences that turn out well.
Yeah.
I would love.
So you would just you would have these horses like take off on you. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Like riding with a group of people, and my horse was like wanting to be the first in line, and I would just spin them around, be like, "Nope, we're gonna turn. Okay, we're gonna just keep turning until you eventually get the message that like we're not racing right now."
Horses have a mind of their own, and there's like herd dynamics, and so I don't want to go too much into this because it would take a lot of time, but basically in a herd there's usually a boss mare and one stallion. Now if there's geldings, which is basically neutered males, they'll be tolerated within the herd as well, but a stallion will not typically tolerate another stallion within their herd. And then within the mares, there's a hierarchy, right? Like, so you have your boss mare, and then like there's like, her lieutenants or whatever, right? And then what's really interesting is down at the bottom, there's like the runt. Now, the runt actually usually gets adopted by the boss mare, and like nobody gets to pick on the runt because that's like her little baby,
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's some interesting dynamics that go on there. All right. So last question I have, I'm just checking if you all have any other questions. Now's the time, throw them up because we're about to start to wind this one down. Last question for me. When one of the trainings that I went to with you, you were talking about when you first got to Patagonia, And they drop you off, and it's like this, whoa, I'm by myself in the wilderness, nobody around me for miles. There's nothing. There's no hospitals, there's no grocery store, there's nothing, right? And there's that moment where most contestants probably are like, okay, I got to start building my shelter, let me look for a water source, right? But you handled it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Right? Did any of that, and can you talk about that for a minute? And then did any of that come into play when you realized this was no ordinary storm that you guys are dealing with?
Yeah. So in Patagonia, as the civilization went out of sight, the boat went around the corner, I put all my stuff down, and my first thing to do was to introduce myself to the land. Like, I'd never been there before. It didn't know who I was. And to share my intention for my time there. I didn't know how long it would be, but I knew that I wanted to make connection with the land and to live with the land, as like in harmony and as a caretaker, and hoping to leave it a better place for having spent time there.
And your mindfulness, I think, was a big factor in how you made it 86 days, because how many contestants, a week in, 2 weeks in, the mental game is now getting to them, right? The loneliness, the missing their family and stuff. Your mindfulness to be able to say, what an experience I have here, right? Like, I'm getting to do something very unique that live in harmony with this little area in nature. I think that's part of what made you so successful. Would you agree?
I would. I mean, a dream of mine was to live on the land for like as long as I could. And so even in the hardest moments where I was exhausted and crying and just like having a terrible time, I'd ask myself, do I still want to be here? And it's like, yeah, I do. Like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I want to be here as long as I can. And to enjoy as much of it as I can, even when like there are a lot of hard moments.
Did that mindfulness help at all with this storm when you realized this is something different? This is a once in a lifetime human disaster of epic proportions.
Yeah, I mean, a strange thing being here is that my understanding of the greater impact was very limited. I didn't know how bad the flooding was places. I mean, a neighbor like told us the flooding was bad, but it didn't sink in. Like, it was incomprehensible.
Yeah.
And to the extent of like that one spot was a case that happened everywhere. Like, that didn't translate to me.
Yeah.
And so it was a slow process, honestly, of like starting to drive around and seeing things in person, seeing more videos online of places where I've been, like a place I used to nanny and like take the little kid to the park all the time. Their house was like up on a hill. The water almost got to their where their house used to be.
Wow.
We no longer live there, but it was like, oh my gosh, that's so much water.
Yeah.
And then to still see all the damage, you drive pretty much anywhere and can see it still. So the mindfulness, with the response of like, let's just stay put, my partner and my mom and I, like, let's just stay put, help if we can in our neighborhood, but not be taking resources from people who are able to go and like help more than we can, like fuel resources. And then going around and like, oh, that was a hickory tree that fell and now there's hickory nuts everywhere. And so going to collect hickory nuts and going and collecting acorns as a way of like, well, let's interact with what's happened. And we don't know how long things are going to be bad. So let's add to our stores, and also have something to do, keep the hands occupied, helps keep the mind at ease.
Yep.
So
I love that.
Was helpful.
Yeah.
And then just focusing on the basics again of like, all right, well, let's cook a meal, let's eat, let's clean up.
Try to keep hygiene going, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Do you got time for one more? I know we're pushing it a little bit.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, this is the last question, y'all. This is from Hudson Valley Prepping and Survival. Were you thankful for having the camera to talk to when you were on alone?
Oh, that's a great question, Hudson Valley. Yes and no. I don't know. I think people interact with the camera in all different kinds of ways. Would a soccer ball have been a better companion? No, I think my experience with the camera was that it was a good part of my purpose for being there.
Okay.
Because not only did I want to have the experience of living on the land for as long as I could and really seeing how my skills could provide for me, but I also wanted to show people who were going to watch it that there was another way of interacting with the earth than was often portrayed with survival.
Yes. I love
instead
that.
of it being, a lot of survival is portrayed as like, take. Like, it's there, take it. Don't worry about the repercussions of that on the land. And my training was more of a caretaker aspect of how can my needs get met, and how can that be met in a way that's actually better for the landscape. So when harvesting saplings that I wove my shelter out of, I caretook. Like, I didn't just clear cut a whole sapling grove. I went in and cut out ones that weren't as healthy, and spent extra time and effort to do that, and went farther because I didn't want to just cut all the ones down that were right here.
Yeah.
So I got some from this grove and then went off and got some from another grove. So the camera and telling my story to the camera was like purpose beyond self, is the simplest way to say it.
Yeah. You wanted to use it as an opportunity to teach.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great. And I think that's why, and I'm going to end with this. Thank you, everybody in chat, by the way, for awesome questions. And I see there was a lot of good side conversations going on too. I have to check it out. It sounds like there was another plane crash, if I read that in the chat correctly. I'll check that out later. But I think that your approach to that is what made you, for many people that I talk to, their favorite contestant on all the seasons of Alone. I hear that from a lot of people. They're like, "Oh man, you got to meet Carleigh. She was my favorite." I'm like, "All right, good. Go Georgia Bushcraft, and you can meet her." Yeah, you have a different style that's all about mindfulness, being in harmony with nature. I could be wrong in how I see this, but I think that's a little bit more bushcraft than survival, right? Like that, there's working with the resources that you got, but being respectful of those things too.
Yeah. Yeah. And oh shoot, I had a thought. It just went out of my brain. I lost it, but the thought that stuck is that I'm going to say it out loud to you, Tom, and to everybody here, maybe for the first time publicly.
Okay.
Is that I'm working on a book about time in Patagonia. That's like a journal format that I wrote a ton after I came home from that experience. And then it's been challenging the editing process is challenging. But working on that aspect of it right now.
I was hoping you were going to write a book. I'm really excited to hear that. That is awesome.
Yeah.
Good.
And then, the part, I think, like, I didn't go on alone to try to entertain. Some people go on and they are trying to be entertaining specifically. I just went on to be me, and to try to share that there's another way of interacting with the earth, and to have that influence. As well as ourselves, right? Like, have more compassion and connection within ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think you accomplished that, and you definitely have motivated a lot of people to think about these things differently, and people that probably wouldn't have even gotten into like just going for a hike in the woods. I think, like now they by seeing things like that, they're like, there's something else out there than this, my city blocks. Let me go check this out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Or,
thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
oh, if anybody wants to be able to know more about the book, I do have a monthly newsletter I send out that you can sign up for on humannatureconnection.com to hear the new things as they come out.
Mm-hmm. Definitely sign up for that, y'all. And again, if you're tuning in a little bit late, I got all of the links down in the description below. Make sure you check out. She's got a lot of things going on between retreats and healing and online classes. And of course, if you get the chance to go to Georgia Bushcraft, go. You can meet Carleigh and there were a lot of really cool people that you'll know from different shows. I'm just thinking Ed Snyder was there, right? Who was the guy that was over in the corner this year with the slingshots?
Zachary Fowler.
Yeah, Zachary Fowler. Yeah. And people from Naked and Afraid too. There's a lot of people from Naked and Afraid there too. So you can learn from some amazing teachers. So definitely please consider doing it if you get a chance to go. Carleigh, thank you so much. Always appreciate you. You're always welcome back here. All you have to do is you shoot me a message, or you know how to get in touch with me. And anytime you want to promote something or whatever, we'll have you on here.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and be in touch.
All right, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you. And make sure you do something fun and get outside. All right. We'll close this one out. And I hit the wrong button.